I'm Diane Barrett with the BE Collection. Today is the first interview of 2023, and I'm happy to say this is Jolie Curtis, and she is in Yachats. Are you in Yachats, Oregon?
No, Florence.
Florence, okay. She's in Florence, Oregon. We met while we were on vacation a few months ago. I was delighted when you said you'd always wanted to be archived, because that's what this is about. So first of all, I want to start with your education and your profession. You're a registered nurse.
Correct. Now happily retired.
I understand that. I'm retired registered nurse too. This is actually behind me at the LA County Hospital.
Yeah.
Los Angeles, and that's my first occupation as a nurse in Los Angeles was there.
Wow.
That's where Marge and I met each other. So we decided to use that as a background.
I think it's perfect.
And I chose it today because you're also a nurse. So we have
Well, thank you.
How did you get to Oregon? Start from where you were born and
I was actually born in upstate New York. I was born in 1961. And
what's your birthday?
April 14th, 1961.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'm a native New Yorker. Let's go Mets.
You still have an accent.
I don't hear it. People say, especially when I get angry, that if you're talking to me, you're talking to the hand comes out, but I don't hear it. But
how long did you live there?
We were in New York for almost 10 years, and then we moved to Miami, Florida, because my dad got a job on the editorial board of the Miami Herald. He'd been a newspaper man since he was 15, basically. Worked for the New York Post and was the sports editor. And so when he got this job offer, having 4 kids, it seemed like a good time to get out of New York. So I actually was in Miami about 10 years. I escaped when I was 20 and packed everything I had into a suitcase and flew to San Francisco because my childhood was not that great. Like many nurses that I've worked with and spoken with, one or more of the parents has a drug or alcohol problem. And in my family, unfortunately, it was my mother.
Do you think that's peculiar to nurses more than any other occupations? Have you found that interesting?
Yeah, there was a study done, I believe, in the late 80s of just registered nurses, and they had asked how many had a parent that had a problem with alcohol or drugs. And the percentage was almost 7 out of 10, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, I may be misquoting, but the number was very high, and it made sense to me because I'm a caretaker. We're caretakers.
Right.
And I often feel that, I couldn't fix my family, but I was going to do everything I could to try to help someone else. I was very, very open at a very young age about my sexuality. I had no doubt in my mind that I was a lesbian.
How old were you when you were aware of that?
5.
5.
Actually, my mom, I was in nursery school or kindergarten, and she got a call from my teacher. And I remember this little girl, she was a year older than I was, and she had blonde hair. And they called my mom and they said, Jolie at nap time will not sleep on her own mat. She's always curling up with this other little girl. And we thought you might want to know about that because it could be a problem. And
they said you were a problem because of that?
Yes, that it could be a problem. Something could develop.
Really?
And my mom asked me, she said, well, why do you keep napping on her over with her? And I said, well, I love her. And it just came out very naturally. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, and she didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. But I remember that, and I'm thinking I was 5 years old and I was already,
Uh,
a little baby dyke, basically. And I was very aware that I was different.
mhm.
I had three older brothers, and I'm the youngest and the only girl. And I always was interested, in their girlfriends, and why do I feel this way? And then at about, I think I was 8 years old, the wonderful thing about my father and mother was that there were no limitations on what we could read, because he was a journalist, he was a newspaper man, and my mom was absolutely brilliant. And so I had access to whatever books I wanted, and I was 8, and I found The Well of
Oh,
Loneliness.
you did? Wow, that was early.
And I felt, yeah, well, and right after that, I read Franz Kafka, Metamorphosis.
Uh-huh.
So I was a little confused. And I read The Well of Loneliness, and I realized that I wasn't alone. And in the very early 70s, I started hearing women's music. And, I heard Meg and Tret and Holly Near, and it was wonderful. And at that point in my life, it was life-saving.
Huh. What do you mean by that?
I felt so awkward,
Did you?
and so I could not be myself.
Mhm.
And I really didn't have anybody to talk to about it except for my very best friend. And she felt the same way I did. And that was amazing.
Mhm.
But it
Good.
was it was lonely. And I come from a Jewish family, and we're the next generation after the Holocaust, and there were, I believe, certain expectations. And me being a lesbian was not one of the expectations. And my mom and I don't actually know if this was the truth or not, but they actually told me that my grandparents, when they found out that I was gay, which was when I was 15, actually sat Shiva for me, which is the Jewish mourning period, and they
Right,
cover the mirrors. And
right.
I never really got a chance to talk to them about that.
Uh,
And that's something I regret.
did they live in close?
No, they were in New York. They were in New
Yes.
York.
Mhm.
Yeah, excuse me.
I've never
So,
heard of someone that's alive. Have you?
have I what?
Have you heard of sitting Shiva for someone who's living?
Never.
Never.
You don't, it's not done. It's just not.
That was
Yeah. So I
they were
think
trying
that
to do to help you out.
that may have been just something from my mother. I'll never really be sure.
Mhm.
But I got kicked out of my house when I was 15, and it's it was shocking, and it was difficult being alone. And the next few years I made a lot of mistakes,
Mhm.
and I got involved in things that 15-year-olds shouldn't get involved with.
How did you get kicked out of your house? Who determined
um
you were on the
I
right road?
my mother, who in her cups was rather abusive. I fought back.
Physically?
And yes,
Uh-huh.
and emotionally. And I'd had it, she had stepped on my last nerve, and she knew how to push my buttons because she was the one who had sewn them on. And
The same. I never thought of that, but that's true.
yeah, and I fought back.
Good knowledge of your buttons.
And my dad came home, and he said, that's it, somebody's got to leave, and your mom's not leaving. So at 15, my stuff was right in front of the outside the door.
Oh,
And it was like, can I make a phone call? I felt like it was my last phone call. And I called a friend, and her mom said, yeah, come over. Absolutely. And I couch surfed. But I'll tell you, during all of this, I didn't miss a single day of school, and I didn't miss a single assignment, because books and education were what saved me.
I can understand that. So they gave you safety and
Hmm. Yeah, and I started out initially. I graduated from high school, and I was going into journalism because I loved writing, and I loved my dad.
yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe it's on my DNA. And I realized that I really wasn't very settled. I had landed in Fort Lauderdale, and this is 1977 or 1978. And I wasn't happy. And I made a decision that I was going to get as as geographically far away from Miami and my parents as I could, and still stay in the United States. And
You left your home, the place you resided with your parents. Did you then go to a friend's house and then leave that
yeah,
on your
yeah,
own?
I lived with a man for a while, and that was a very dangerous situation. You know, Miami in the 70s was a hotbed of drugs and violence. And I finally was able to scrape, I was working 3 jobs and finally was able to scrape together enough money to put a down payment on an apartment for myself.
Wow,
And I
that's
was,
amazing at that age. I mean, really. Give
when I
yourself.
look back on it now, it is
Yeah,
pretty
I
amazing.
mean, really. How old are you? 16 or
Almost 17,
that's pretty.
almost 17. And so I said, I've got to get away from these people. And my brother and his wife were both doing internships and then residency at UCSF. So they were in San Francisco.
Mhm.
And this was my oldest brother. And I called him and I said, if I can get the money together, would would I have a place to stay with you? And at this point, I wasn't very close with my brother. I am now.
Right.
And he said, get out of there. Just come. And they were not aware of, I mean, they probably were aware of about 10% of what was actually going on in my life.
Were they also abused physically?
My brother, my brothers all were, but
Mhm.
it's not something that I believe they've really worked through. All of us in our own way. I was the youngest, so I got the brunt of it. But, we all have our little idiosyncrasies. We all, we call it the Curtis neurosis, and we all have it.
Mhm.
So I think we all can be pretty controlling. We like to know what the next step is,
That's
because there
great.
was so
Yeah.
much uncertainty.
Right. Was the abuser primarily your mother?
Only my mother. Yeah.
Only your mother.
Yeah. She was a middle class Jewish housewife, and she stayed home and my dad went to work. And he was really unaware of what the afternoons were like. So for me, school, I wouldn't miss a day of school. I loved it.
Right.
And I could open up a book and I could be anybody. And, I could be 8 feet tall and bulletproof, which at that point in my life, I desperately needed.
Mhm.
I really did. So I, 1980, put everything I owned into a suitcase and went to San Francisco.
Uh,
And I remember my brother picked me up at the San Francisco airport. And he said, before we go home, I want to show you something. And he took me to the top of Twin Peaks in San Francisco. And it was nighttime. And there's that beautiful view right down Market Street. And he just wanted me to see the city.
mhm.
And immediately something changed in me. I felt safe.
Uh-huh.
And I hadn't felt safe in a very long time. And from that moment on, my focus shifted because I lived with my brother and my sister-in-law for a couple of months. And then at Maud's, the bar, in the Haight Ashbury, I think it was the oldest women's bar in San Francisco, certainly.
What year
Anyway,
was
while
that?
I was mods,
What year was that?
that was 1981.
Mhm.
And I walked in and I found a family. And I wasn't even 21 yet, but at that point they didn't card me. And I was glad. And I met this woman
Yes.
who,
I remember
who
those feelings. So, whoop.
oh yeah, I did pass, there's no doubt. I met a woman who was just this crazy, neurotic, exuberant Jewish woman from the Bronx
Mhm.
who said, me and a couple of my friends are renting a flat in the middle of the Haight-Ashbury on Frederick Street, and it's got 5 bedrooms. We have a bedroom open, and I think the rent for me was going to be like $70 a month. And I moved in. It was an amazing household. There were
That was quite a flat, 5 bedrooms.
yeah, yes, we had 3 of our gay guys, and there were 3 lesbians living there. And I, of course, immediately fell in love with, I was 20 and she was 40.
Mhm.
And she was fabulous. I thought the minute I met her, it was like, oh, another Aries. And I felt like I had a home. I felt like I'd found my tribe.
Mhm.
And it was colorful and it was fun. And I was working a lot of different jobs around San Francisco. I would, basically whatever I needed to do for a paycheck. I sold art, and then I was a sous chef at Mama's Restaurant in Macy's downtown, which was the gay mecca of the world. And then in 1982, I noticed that my gay male friends, of whom I had quite the tribe, there was something going on. People were getting sick.
And
And
when did you decide you wanted to be a nurse?
that's what that's what
At that
happened.
point? Right.
Yeah, I by 1983, we had GRID, gay related immune deficiency. We didn't have AIDS yet. We had, all these different complexes that were coming up, and I was terrified. And at that point, I was living right above the Castro. I could walk down in 3 blocks, and they had built the first freestanding hospice, Coming Home Hospice, in San Francisco, and I could walk to it from my house, and they needed volunteers. And the lesbian community and the gay male community in San Francisco was quite separatist at that time. But all of a sudden, all of our boys started getting sick. And I started volunteering, and I was working a shift. And one of my very best friends in the world, Billy, who is a guardian angel for me, he grabbed my hand. He was in one of the rooms, and he was very close to death. And he grabbed my hands and he said, you know what, girl, you got to get paid for doing this because you're good at it. And
Something
when
one person, huh?
he changed my life. And when we did his celebration of life 4 days later, he left me the tuition for nursing school.
Oh, really? That's incredible.
And I thought, wow, that was unexpected.
Uh-huh.
So I had enough credit. I was able to transfer credits, and I had almost all of my prerequisites for nursing school. And CCSF, City College of San Francisco, at that point had an unbelievable nursing program. So I applied, and they had 45 slots open, and I think I was number 46.
See? Wow.
And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to put it out there. If this is meant to be, it's meant to be. And a day before classes opened, I got a call from the lead instructor, and she said, one of our participants is pregnant and does not want to enroll at this time. Would you like her spot? And that's how I got into nursing school.
Great.
And I really felt unbelievably lucky. And I know some people who are not medical probably wouldn't understand this, but to be able to work and do, you know, this internship at San Francisco General Hospital's ER in the early 80s, I mean, we called it the Knife and Gun Club.
Right.
And
This was, right.
I know, oh, I've heard the stories, and I have many friends who worked there. And people thought I was crazy because you could pick where you wanted during nursing school. You could pick whatever special interest that you had to concentrate on that. And I thought, I am going to learn every skill possible. I want to see everything because I want to know how to, you know, get an IV in immediately, and a catheter and suction and all of these things. And I got quite the education. I really did. It was.
You were open to it.
And they knew it. They were like, they kept calling me
You wanted it.
Yeah, they kept calling me the kid because I was, what, 23. And there were some of these, and I say this lovingly and with gratitude, there were some battle axe nurses in San Francisco General's ER, and every single one of them took me under their wing and allowed me to do things that I never thought I would get to do. But I knew that when I hit the ground running, I wanted to be a competent professional. And
We were ready.
I was ready. I was going to do whatever it took to get ready.
Living in that house with the 5 flats with a.
Yeah. By that time, actually, I had moved out with my ex, who was 20 years older than I was. We had gotten a little place that was out in the avenues. And so I was doing a little commuting back and forth, and I loved it. I did. Everybody told me, you know, you love oncology, you love trauma, perhaps you should try to get a job right out of school there. And I said, no, I'm not ready for that. So for my first year, I was at Mount Sinai on their med-surg unit, doing everything, you know, that I could do to learn. And there was a program that was going on at UCSF, a bone marrow transplant program that was trying to get off the ground. And Stanford was just opening up a bone marrow transplant unit. And I thought, well, I've had my year of med-surg and I'm losing my mind and I don't want to be a nurse anymore.
Really? Huh.
Oh, yeah. It was horrific because we had all of these beautiful young men coming in by the hour.
Right.
And there was nothing you could do but sit with them and talk to them and sing with them. And it just, I didn't know if I could do it. And I went down to Stanford and I interviewed, and they were having, the program was a bone marrow transplant program. And it was a specialized unit. It was called the compromised host unit. And I fell in love with oncology, and I fell in love with, you know, being part of clinical trials, you know, using Zofran in the 80s when it was just, I mean, different things that just sparked my love of medicine and my love of people. And I would probably still be there today.
What happened?
Oh, I fell in love.
Somebody else.
I'd left I had left my first lover. I was involved with another woman for about 8 years. And we always went up to Smith River, California, which is also on the coast, for vacation. And we stayed at this little vacation spot. And for almost 2 years, she said, there's someone you have to meet. I think you two would be really good friends. And in all that time, she kept seeing her because Donna worked there.
Uh-huh.
And I'd never met her. And then they were doing an Easter in July festival. And where my ex, who was not my ex at the time, we were walking across the parking lot, and she said, that's Donna right there. And Donna was standing on a terrace, and a bolt of lightning just went through the top of my head and shot out my toes. And I knew that my life was never going to
change ahead, right?
What?
You had a change coming.
Oh my. And 5 weeks later, lock, stock, and barrel, I left my job. I left my home in San Francisco. Actually, at that time, I'd moved to Pacifica, and I moved to Oregon.
Really?
And
Did you move to Roseburg then? Did you,
what?
Did you move to Roseburg?
No, we moved to Brookings for a year.
Uh-huh.
Right over, yeah, it's right over the California-Oregon border. And everybody told me I was crazy to leave Stanford, and I was crazy to leave my relationship. She also had a problem with alcohol, so I was going to fix her, you know.
I see.
And then I met Donna, who was this normal woman, which shocked me. And everybody said, you know, don't do it. And we're approaching 29 years, so I think it might last. I hope and pray, but I think we might be good. And
long time.
Yeah, long time. And I was very spoiled working at Stanford and in San Francisco, because my being gay and in a relationship was really not an issue early on in my career. Then I moved to Oregon.
Uh-huh.
And we spent 1 year in Brookings, and I couldn't find work. There were no big hospitals really. And I started doing home health care. And there was a nurse that I worked with, and I was me. I've never been in the closet. I don't think I'd know how to close the door, frankly.
Uh-huh. Which is
but
good.
There was a nurse that I worked with who was very cold and really had no interest in engaging with me. And then we had a patient that we both were seeing, and I said, I have a question about the blood pressures. And she said, I would prefer it if you didn't speak to me.
Really? Was this because you were a lesbian?
Well, yeah.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
said, what's going on? And she said, you are disgusting. Your lifestyle is disgusting. And if you want to communicate with me, send me a note. And I felt like I had a bucket of ice water poured in my face, because here I was, I had just met the love of my life. I was in Oregon. I'd always wanted to live in this part of the Pacific Northwest. And then this blatant homophobe,
Right.
it kind of cut me down, you know, to my toes. And I was shocked. And when I got home, I was in tears. And I said, I've never really had somebody just, I've had more bigotry thrown at me for being Jewish and being proud of being Jewish than I have for being a lesbian. And here it was totally different. So we were in Brookings for a year, and then I got a job offer in a little town. It was a little town called Roseburg, which is about an hour and 15 minutes south on I-5 from Eugene, Oregon. And it's a beautiful rural community, and there's the VA is there, so they have a hospital, and then there's another hospital. And they had a job opening for a home health director. And I knew that I needed to get out of Brookings. So I drove over and I interviewed. And after the interview, one of the women there said, "Can I talk to you alone for a moment?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well," she said, "I'm pretty sure you're family." And I said, "Yes," even though I had my little business suit on.
People still use that expression.
What?
I wonder if people still use that expression, the family,
Oh, I know.
your family.
I do.
Do
I
you?
do.
I haven't used
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I
Family. And she said, I don't know what you know about Roseburg, but it's called Redneck Roseburg for a reason.
Uh-huh.
And I said, "Look, I really need this job."
I'd like to work.
and you know, thank you for the warning.
Uh-huh.
And so she was looking out for me. She said, "You know, there's a huge women's community here. The land lesbians who bought up a lot of land in the 70s and made it women's land.
That's smart.
And so there is a community here." And I was a little surprised when we got to Roseburg. Just, I guess, I don't want to sound like I'm being judgmental, but there was a lot of God being shoved at me.
So what was your concern if you were open? Did you think would be the consequence of that?
I think probably a lack of understanding. And at that point, I wasn't sure that I wanted to put that much energy into educating people around me. So it's interesting because my wife is a pastor's daughter, is a Baptist minister's daughter. And her mother, actually, Mama Lois, who we just lost a few months ago. Yeah, I worked at that hospital locally for about a year. And every day for the first 6 months of living in Roseburg, I said to Donna, I said, I want to go back to California. I want to go back to California.
Was she working also?
Yes, she was. She was. And, you know,
Now she
we
works
were,
as a hospice nurse, as a hospice worker, right?
yeah. She actually, right after we moved here, I met a doctor in the hospital who had just come up from City of Hope. He was an oncologist, and we just hit it off immediately. And he said, "Do you know anybody that might be willing or able to come work for me?" And Donna went over to interview, and she ended up working that day for him and gave chemo for him for the next 10 years.
Wow.
And then after she left that practice, she went into hospice for the past 15. And when we were both retired, we fulfilled our dream of moving to the Oregon coast 7 months ago.
I know, here you are.
I know.
Right.
Yeah. That was serendipitous.
It really was. You know, we didn't carry a business card with us or anything.
I just wrote your name down in my date book. I'm still one of those people that has to write everything down.
Well, it worked.
It did work. When we first moved to Roseburg, I'd known about the women's community. And the other thing that I knew about the women's community was that they were fairly separatist at that time in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And I've never felt that way. I think that, you know, everybody, we need each other. So don't exclude anybody.
I know.
And I missed my gay male friends terribly, because I did not see a whole lot of gay men in Roseburg. And the hospital really reflected a little bit of the small town redneck feel. When I landed up in the hospital, they just automatically put Donna down as my sister. And people would always say, oh, you two sisters are so funny together. And we would just
I like that.
die laughing. We could not look less like sisters if we tried. And I just felt like I was there to do my job, and I did. I loved the ICU. I really enjoyed being back at the bedside. I did management at the first hospital for a year. I was the director of home health and hospice, and I didn't like being at a desk. I really am much, much more comfortable at the bedside, especially in ICU in the middle of something going on. My entire career, I worked 12-hour nights. And I would tell my boss, if you ever try to put me on day shift, I'll quit, which is not something they heard out of nurses. But I loved it because of the autonomy. You didn't have all of those people around, and your skills better be damn good or don't work nights.
Mhm.
And I love that. I got to experience a lot of very interesting things while I was working there. And I was able to get a job in the emergency room at a hospital close to Eugene. It actually was in Cottage Grove. The hospital that I was working at, there were just things going on that I didn't agree with. And I was not going to put myself in any danger. And there were a lot of changes with upper management. And at that point, I felt like,
Wait, I would not go there.
at that point, I knew
It's a small world.
why.
Medicine is a small world.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's very tiny.
Yeah, so I could eliminate that information from your,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. So I worked in an emergency room up in Cottage Grove, and I commuted. It was a gorgeous commute. I really didn't mind, and there was no traffic. But what had happened to me the year that we moved to Roseburg, I was just before I was 35 years old. I knew I was getting sick, and I knew it was something serious, but being a nurse, I of course ignored it. Because if you ignore it, then you don't have to deal with it. But my joints were swelling. I was having trouble walking sometimes. My fatigue level was huge. So my doctor said, I think you might have lupus. And I knew for a 34, 35-year-old woman what a diagnosis like that could mean. And I was terrified. And she sent me to a rheumatologist in Eugene, who is my rheumatologist to this day, 25 years later. And they ran all the testing, and he said, you have psoriatic arthritis. And at that time, my rheumatoid factors were very low. And then that changed. And ultimately, they diagnosed me with polyarthritis. So it's kind of a combination of psoriatic with rheumatoid. I joked with him. I said, I never do anything half-assed. If I'm going in for something, I'm going to go. And one night in the ER, I think I was spiking an IV bag, and the tendons in my wrist just basically snapped. And by that time, I'd had major ankle surgery because the joints were disintegrating.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd had well over 120 joint injections, and I realized, and this was the bad day. This was a very bad day. I realized that I could no longer do what I was doing, the 12-hour nights, the emergency room. And after a lot of contemplation and tears and a few other things, I ended up having to retire from nursing.
Uh-huh.
And I had to do a lot of work. I thank God for my therapist. during this whole time. She was an incredible woman who was one of those people that you start to talk to and they get you right away. And I don't find that that happens very often. And I realized for me that being a nurse was what I was, not what I did. And that had to shift. I had to go through the whole grieving process. And I felt like I'd lost a huge part of me. And for the next, I took time to get healthy. I actually started, taking the meds and, trying different therapies, and I got a little healthier, and I couldn't just stay home. That really was no longer an option.
Style. No.
No, it's really not my style. So I started to volunteer everywhere I could. I volunteered for the American Cancer Society. I volunteered for the Red Cross. I volunteered for the local recovery hotline, the crisis line. And I love that. When we moved to Roseburg, there wasn't a phone number where you can make a call and say, look, I'm really, really scared. My husband's drinking, or my daughter is doing this, or the person calls and says, I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. I actually volunteered there for off and on, probably 10 years. Mm-hmm. And then 5.5 years ago, a friend of mine had asked me if I would be interested in becoming a docent at Wildlife Safari, which is a drive-through park very close to our house. And I said, sure. Uh-huh. It's in Winston. Uh-huh. And it's this incredible place. And I went to my first docent meeting on a Monday and basically didn't leave for 5.5 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was, well, the thing, I think, for me, one of the things that I miss most about nursing was the teaching aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Was being able to talk to patients and families and help them understand in human terms what was happening. Right. And I miss that so much. And one of the wonderful things about being a docent is you get to teach. Right. And because I love their cheetah program, I got to be up at Cheetah Lodge, which was the last stop on the road. And that was where you answered everyone's questions. And I just fell in love with it. And it really became my happy place.
That's great.
And then we got Donna retired. And it took us months and months and months, but we downsized. We have a house that's half the size of the one that we had in Roseburg. And we're in our dream house. We're living our lives, and we're really happy.
What made you select Florence?
We always say that Florence selected us because we were looking specifically at Yachats because there's a gay community there and it's very diverse. But home prices in Yachats were insane and probably still are. So we said that we would look anywhere between Depot Bay and Coos Bay. And we looked at 1,000 houses, and then Donna was on her phone continuously. And she said, what about this house? It's going on the market tomorrow and it's in Florence. Mm-hmm. And I said, let's go look. And we were the first people to come and look at this house. And as soon as we walked in, we looked at each other and kind of said, okay, this is our home.
That's great.
And they got 9 offers by the end of the day.
Wow. But
we were older and had better financing.
Great. Great for being older. For
what
all
what
the work you did all your life.
Yeah, well, what we didn't know, and we didn't find out until a couple months in, is that Florence has a huge and welcoming, diverse gay community. And
I didn't know that till I met you.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
next time I
and
look it up, I thought, wow, you know,
it's remarkable. And we live in a cul-de-sac where we know our neighbors and they know us. And when we lived in Roseburg, we lived on a very big house in the middle of 7 acres in the mountains.
wow, that's
And it
beautiful.
was beautiful and secluded. So we hadn't lived in a neighborhood for a very long time because we were in that house 22 years. But yeah, we're,
29 years?
excuse me,
How long have you been together, did you say?
almost 29. Yeah. So that was a huge chunk of our time together. And we, the house found us, and fate just, we feel like we were meant to be here. And we've met incredible people. We've met a lot of retired medical professionals.
Really?
Yeah,
You could be my
yeah.
recruiter for all the lesbians who want to be.
I already have 2 people who want to talk to you.
Absolutely, we love you. I heard that about Roseburg being a difficult area before. And I don't know Roseburg, but
Yeah,
I had a lover who went in nurses training in Roseburg many years ago. But I heard about the difficulty in terms of
yeah.
being accepted, which is sad. I mean,
It actually, it wasn't unusual during especially 2000 to 2010, to see people on Garden Valley, which is like the main drag in Roseburg, holding up signs, God hates fags. And just incredible, and they're still holding up signs that say that, AIDS is God's revenge. And part of me wants to run them over. um, it it actually makes my gut clench. And the right to lifers out there, and the photos. I just want to, go to the store and not have to deal with these people. And it was getting Roseburg through the years, because we were there for 27 total years, just keeps moving farther and farther to the right.
Mhm.
And I feel like we got out at the right time.
Florence is really a city. I mean, it's
Hmm. Yeah, it's a little town of 10,000, and Old Town Florence is one of the quaintest old towns I've ever seen. And the people here are so warm and welcoming.
Mhm.
So I feel like Donna and I have been truly blessed. I really do.
We're with you when we met you. Were really nice.
Of course, when I was 15, there was no internet, there was no Google, there were no
No,
computers.
how do we live?
But if I had had a resource like this collection,
That's right.
where I could see people like me, who look like me, who felt the way that I did, I I think that it would have helped immeasurably, because I struggled, and I know that there are people out there who do struggle.
That's right.
And I was able to be successful as a lesbian nurse, and I never ever lied about who I was.
No, you're an excellent example of somebody who's forthright with who they are very early on.
Apparently, when I was 5.
I know. Well, I don't know if you've had a chance to watch my interview, but when I was 5 or 6, I knew from reading that I went to Catholic school that the cleavage that the nun had when she bent over the reading chairs, something I was attracted to. And I knew not to say anything about it. Now, how do you do these things? I mean, no, it wasn't a dinner table discussion, I know that,
No,
but you just
and
know. And
you do know.
word for it, but you say, I became a really good reader.
That's what saved me. I've collected
I mean, she was
books.
tall, I was on those little chairs, and so it was a good experience.
There you go.
Right.
Well, the bookcase behind me, at a very early age, I just became entranced with gay and lesbian history, especially lesbian history, and the expatriate writers in Paris in the 1890s to 1940s. So behind me, the collection is all Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville West and Gertrude Stein. And this collection will be donated when I pass, because I've made it kind of my project to make sure that I have first editions. I have
Wonderful.
our history. And because books saved me. Books saved me. I have no doubt in my mind. I mean, from 15 to 20, it's a blur. And then I landed in San Francisco, and I don't know. It was the right place at the right time.
San
And I'm
Francisco was known as a place of acceptance when I was
Mhm.
in Los Angeles. Someone told me, you should go to San Francisco. People like you there are a lot of them there.
When I walked into Maud's, when I walked into the bar, it was like breathing rarefied air, even though there was cigarette smoke and it smelled like old beer, and I knew I was home. And Ricky Stryker, who is the woman who owned Maud's, and she owned the other bar on, I'm trying to think it'll come to me, was welcoming. You know, she saw this little baby dyke walk in.
Well, they know, which is
Yeah.
just like we know.
Yeah, we know.
So if you knew your life was coming to a close, what would you like to be remembered for?
I would like to be remembered for my sense of humor, for my compassion, for my ability to love unconditionally, for my love of the New York Mets, which anybody who knows me knows is an everlasting love. And I want to be remembered as somebody who was in San Francisco from 81 until 94. And I watched the plague. I saw it happen around me. And I saw what the nurses did. I saw what the doctors did. And I saw what our community did. And we survived. And we survived. And I used to say that, you know, I was a victim of abuse, and that would excuse a lot of my behaviors. But today I know that I'm a survivor, and that's where my strength comes from. And that's what I'd like to be remembered for, I think.
That's a great tribute to yourself.
Thank you.